I was recommended by a temporary staffing agency. I had no clue about the identity of my prospective employer or the nature of the job. All I knew was that the compensation was lucrative, an extravagant rate of $685 per night for a week-long assignment. It would more than suffice to settle a couple of credit card bills and cover a significant portion of next month's rent. For that kind of remuneration, I was willing to undertake almost anything. Little did I realize at the time what awaited me. Upon reaching the designated address, I found myself taken aback. It was a substantial establishment situated at the end of a dirt road in the neighboring woods. A plain, unadorned 3-story building greeted me, bearing the sign Synthetic Corp. There were no distinctive markings to hint at its purpose. The location itself was perplexing. Going solely by the name, I could only assume it was some form of biotech company. I might have been recruited for hazardous waste cleanup or a similar endeavor. Regardless, given the generous compensation, I was willing to take the risk, even if it compromised my well-being. As I entered the building and approached the receptionist, I was directed to room 371 on the second floor, where I was to await Al, my new supervisor. The room had a typical office layout, albeit with a touch of quaintness. Red carpeting adorned the floor, and the walls were painted white. Curiously, there were no windows. The room accommodated only 6 desks, arranged in 3 rows of 2, each equipped with its own computer. At the rear of the room, a large wall was covered by a one-way mirror, with an entrance flanked by steps. Inside, there was a solitary chair, desk, and landline phone. Presumably, it served as a place for supervisors to observe productivity. Apart from that, the room held no points of interest, unless one found the waste bin and potted fern in the corner intriguing. An elderly gentleman opened the door to the room and approached me, extending his hand for a handshake. He introduced himself as Al, seeming rather rushed and wasting no time in explaining the task at hand. I was to remain in that very room from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. the following day, every night for a week. He provided me with his cell phone number and a laminated list of rules that had to be strictly adhered to. He emphasized the utmost importance of following each rule precisely as outlined. Once he ensured I grasped the gravity of the situation, he left me alone to begin my first shift, closing the door behind him. That was it? Just staying in the room for 10 hours each night? I had no idea why I was being paid over $5,000 to essentially house sit, but I had learned long ago not to question unexpected blessings. With a smile on my face, I took a seat in the supervisor's room and reviewed the list of rules. There were a total of 10, all of which left me thoroughly perplexed. 1. Once 8 o'clock rolls around, lock the door and do not exit the room under any circumstances until 6 a.m. Plan your bathroom breaks and meal times accordingly. No food or beverages are allowed inside the room. 2. Do not use Hank's computer. It is the one closest to the exit. No one, not even Hank himself, should ever touch it under any circumstances. 3. Answer the phone if it rings, but do not speak. Regardless of what the voice on the other end says, you must not respond. Hang up after 2 minutes have elapsed. 4. Do not permit the janitor to enter. We do not have one. 5. If someone else comes to the door, let them in but ignore them completely. Do not react in any way. Once they leave, close and lock the door behind them. 6. If the waste bin changes position, promptly return it to the corner. 7. Only allow me entry if I provide the correct password. 8. At precisely 9:30, modify the home screens of each computer with different URLs, excluding Hank's. Show no reaction to the displayed content. Act as if nothing unusual is happening. 9. If you encounter Harvey, give him one of the treats from Lisa's desk, the one opposite Hank's. 10. In the event of an emergency, contact me on my cell phone, but not after 10:05 p.m. At the bottom of the list, a handwritten message was scrawled over the laminated surface in pen. No one has made it past night 3. Good luck. I found myself puzzled, briefly considering if Al was eccentric or even unstable, which could explain why previous candidates didn't last. Perhaps his idiosyncrasies were too much for them, causing them to withdraw out of concern for their own safety. However, I wasn't easily swayed. Even if Al was eccentric, I was more than willing to accept his money for what seemed like a straightforward job. At least that's what I initially believed. The first day was incredibly dull. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred. Certainly nothing that matched the expectations set by Al's list. At 9:30, I even changed the home screen URLs on the computers, if only to feel somewhat productive. However, the second night brought some unexpected events. Day 2 started like any other. I settled in for another long night, making sure to eat and take care of personal needs before locking myself in the room. As 9:25 approached, just as I was about to prepare to change the home screens again, I noticed something. The waste bin was positioned right at the top of the overseer's room stairs. I was certain I hadn't placed it there. I experienced a slight surge of adrenaline before calming myself with a smile. The waste bin, the list, it was all just a prank at my expense. Al must have been waiting in the adjacent room, eagerly anticipating my reaction. I hurriedly rushed out to the office floor, only to find it empty. I walked up to the exit and tried the doorknob. It was still locked. Confused and slightly frightened, I quickly picked up the waste bin and returned it to its designated corner. Checking the time, 9:30, I proceeded to change the URLs on all the computers, desperately hoping that I had imagined what had just transpired. After skipping Hank's desk, I entered the final website on PC number 6. Just as I was about to step away, something unusual appeared on the screen. It was live surveillance footage of the room, of the very room I was currently in. I watched myself looking at the computer screen. Then I turned and glanced up, but there was no camera in sight. When I returned my gaze to the screen, I witnessed something terrifying. Another version of myself emerged from the overseer's room. It approached me from behind, grabbed a hard drive from one of the desks, and prepared to strike me in the back of the head. Reacting swiftly, I turned to shield myself, only to find no one there. As I turned back to the screen, it changed, displaying the intended website as if nothing unusual had occurred. Feeling thoroughly shaken, I hurried back to the overseer's room and took a seat, trying to collect myself. I contemplated walking out, but I resolved to persevere. After all, I hadn't suffered any harm. Perhaps Al wasn't deranged, although I didn't know him well enough to be certain. I hadn't sustained any injuries, only questioning my own sanity. So far, whatever was unfolding seemed harmless. Knock, knock. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the door. Startled by the recent horrifying experience, I almost leaped out of my skin. A voice then penetrated through the door. "It's the janitor. I'm just here to clean up. Can you open the door?" the voice outside pleaded. Recalling rule number 4, I followed the instructions and denied the janitor entry. I reassured myself that I had done the right thing, adhering to the rules for my own safety. As long as I remained obedient, I would be fine. It was a simple concept to grasp. I could see this through. Knock, knock. Once again, I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. "I really need to get in there and clean up. Open the door," the voice persisted. Taking a deep breath, I mustered my resolve and successfully ignored the janitor until he eventually left. It felt like an accomplishment, overcoming the challenge and sticking to the rules. I realized I was capable of handling the situation. Despite remaining on the edge of my seat, the next few hours passed without any noteworthy incidents. I even dozed off for a brief moment. It wasn't until 2:30 a.m. that my next trial would arise. A multicolored cat leaped onto the desk in front of me, adorned with beautiful patches of black and orange. It startled me, but the cat seemed friendly, rubbing against my arm. I read the name on its collar. Harvey. I knew what I had to do. I searched through Lisa's desk, found the jar of treats, and fed one to Harvey, who purred with delight. To my amazement, he then charged at the door, effortlessly passing through it. My mouth hung open in awe. Once the initial bewilderment faded, it was replaced with a sense of satisfaction from yet another small victory. Strangely enough, I was beginning to enjoy this job. Ring, ring. The landline phone rang, adhering to the rules. I picked it up and held it to my ear, keeping an eye on the time. "Hey, it's Al. I'm going to be stopping by soon to do some work. How's the job treating you so far?" Al's voice came through the receiver. I remained silent, remembering the rules. There was nothing mentioned about Al calling. I chose not to respond. "Hello? You know you can talk if it's me, right?" Al persisted. I picked up the laminated list of rules and went over them again. There was no mention of Al calling. I stayed true to the rules and remained silent. This is no way to treat your employer. If you don't say anything, I'll have no choice but to fire you. Do you really want that? Al's frustration seeped into his words. I stood my ground, knowing that there were only 20 seconds left. "Fine. I'll see you soon to relieve you of your duty. I guess you couldn't even make it past night 2. Al's voice trailed off. As the 2-minute mark arrived, I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Another hour went by, and I felt safe in the room. Reflecting on the trials I had faced, I was bewildered yet determined. I refused to let the room cloud my judgment. I was in control. Knock, knock. "It's Lisa. Can I come in?" A woman's voice called from outside. Though hesitant, I had to comply with Rule 5. I opened the door, allowing the woman to enter. "You must be the new guy. What do you think of the place?" I returned to my desk in the overseer's room and tried my best to appear nonchalant. Lisa, aware that I could see her through the glass, walked up and engaged me in conversation. "Not very talkative, are you?" Her eyes darted unnaturally in all directions, and her skin seemed to sag, as if it was barely clinging to her bones. I chose not to respond, remaining silent. Lisa didn't speak further. Instead, she stared at the glass for an uncomfortably long time, leaving me deeply unsettled. Eventually, she entered the room and stopped by my side, raising her arm. I hoped she wouldn't notice the irregularity of my breathing, which had become erratic and labored. Suddenly, she forcefully slammed her arm down on the desk, creating a thunderous noise. I fought the urge to flinch, maintaining my composure. After another awkward 5 minutes or so, Lisa left. I hurried to the door and locked it behind her, following another one of the rules. A few moments later, there was another knock. This time, it was a boy claiming to be searching for his father. Against my better judgment, I let him in and returned to my seat. The boy repeatedly sought my help, but I made a conscious effort to ignore him, just as I had with Lisa. However, at one point, our eyes met, and for a split second, his irises turned pitch black, devoid of all color. Startled, I nearly recoiled but managed to restrain myself. Eventually, like Lisa before him, the boy left, and I swiftly locked the door behind him, adhering to another rule. Apart from a few more instances of the waste bin moving around, the rest of the night passed without further incident. Before I knew it, it was time to go home. Despite the nightmares and the contemplation of quitting, an inexplicable curiosity compelled me to return. The room had a strange pull, a beckoning force that I found impossible to resist. Rationality abandoned me, and any excuse was enough to justify my decision. Thus, I resumed my post the following night. As my shift began, I felt a newfound confidence. I had already dealt with a series of absurdities, and I patiently waited for the next challenge. A couple of hours passed without any trouble. No mysterious cat, no eerie images on the computers, no phone calls, and no antics with the waste bin. Boredom began to settle in when suddenly, a loud knocking shattered the silence. Knock, knock. There was no accompanying voice. I called out from the overseer's room, seeking an answer. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty room. There was a brief pause before the response came. "It's me, Al." I retrieved the list and reread the 7th rule. "What's the password?" I inquired, following the protocol. I heard Al chuckle on the other side. "I never wrote down a password," he replied. He was right. There was no password specified in the rule. It had to be Al. Cautiously, I made my way to the door and opened it. Al stood before me wearing a mischievous smile. I heaved a sigh of relief. "Let me guess. Scared of the things that go bump in the night?" he teased, clearly amused by my nervous demeanor. "You have no idea," I confessed. Al stepped inside, and I closed the door, ensuring it was securely locked. He set up his belongings at one of the computers. "Say, why didn't you write down a password?" I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled again, his eyes betraying a hint of cunning. "It's a ruse. Anyone impersonating me might attempt to come up with a password, which would expose them as an imposter. Understand?" "I see. Good thinking," I replied, acknowledging the clever strategy. Returning to his work at the computer, Al seemed focused. I didn't want to disturb him, but my curiosity got the better of me. "What is this place, anyway? Why do these things happen here?" I inquired, hoping for a more enlightening answer. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "It's best if you don't ask questions, especially ones that exceed your pay grade." Though unsatisfied with his response, I knew it was all I would get. I left him to his work and settled back into the overseer's room, observing through the one-way glass. And then it struck me. The computer Al was using belonged to Hank. Double-checking the list, I confirmed that it was indeed Hank's desk, and no one was supposed to touch his computer. Did the same rule not apply to Al? In a last-ditch effort to find more information, I turned the list over, hoping to discover something significant. My heart sank as I read the large, bold text on the back of the laminated sheet. Password: Diner. Damn! A wave of dread washed over me. I hastily grabbed my phone and the scrap of paper with Al's number, dialing it as quickly as my trembling fingers allowed. After a few rings, Al finally picked up. "Hello? Is everything all right over there?" he inquired. "Al, thank goodness. I made a mistake. I thought he was you. I let him in, and now he's on Hank's computer," I confessed, desperation lacing my words. Al sighed deeply, his disappointment evident. I watched as his copy turned away from the computer and stood up. "Listen carefully. Don't act suspicious in any way. You should be fine if he doesn't suspect a thing. If you try to leave or contact anyone else, it'll all be over. Understand?" he warned, his voice tinged with urgency. "Yes, I understand," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Al's copy began to make his way toward the overseer's room. My heart pounded in my chest, faster than ever before. "I'll be there soon. Just don't panic," he said before abruptly ending the call. I held the phone to my ear, pretending to talk to my wife as Al's clone approached me. "I told you, hun, 6 o'clock. That's when I clock out. You don't have to wait up for me. You worry too much. Please, get some rest," I said, trying to maintain a calm facade. Al's clone entered the room and stared at me. I pressed the phone against my chest and met his gaze. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with hidden fear. He continued to stare in silence for a few agonizing seconds before finally speaking. "Can you help me with something on the computer?" I wondered if he could hear the pounding of my heart. "Sure, just give me a moment to finish this call. I'll be there as soon as I can," I replied, desperately hoping to buy myself some time. I carried on pretending to talk on the phone, even staging an argument to prolong the call. Meanwhile, I kept a watchful eye on the door, dreading its slow creaking open. Then, in a moment of sheer relief, the door swung open, revealing the real Al. I had never been so grateful to see someone in my life. Al gestured for me to remain silent, indicating that the clone hadn't yet noticed his presence. With swift and calculated movements, Al approached his doppelganger from behind and seized him by the throat. The clone struggled briefly, but eventually succumbed to Al's vice-like grip. He fell lifeless to the floor and disintegrated into the carpet. I rushed to Al's side, profusely apologizing for the situation. "No need to be sorry. This isn't the first intruder we've encountered in that room, and I'm afraid it won't be the last. I'm just glad you're safe," Al reassured me, his smile offering a small glimmer of comfort. "Speaking of which, could you please shut the door? We wouldn't want another one of me dropping by," he added. "Of course," I replied, grateful for the reminder. I made my way towards the door when I suddenly realized my mistake. I had left it unlocked after the clone entered, allowing Al to enter without any hindrance. Remembering the final rule, I slowly pulled out my phone and opened the call log. My most recent call had connected at 10:18 p.m., a mere 13 minutes past the deadline. As a chill ran down my spine, I turned around to find Al standing right behind me. "Al, what's the password?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and urgency. He grinned, sending a shiver down my spine. "What password?" he replied cryptically. Without a moment's hesitation, I sprinted out of that room as fast as my legs could carry me. The room still held a strange power over me, but I vowed never to return. Or at least, I hoped I would never have to.